Welcome to World Risk Day. My name is Drew Slaton, and I'll be presenting High-Risk Projects, a Global Perspective. I have worked for Bechtel for approximately 22 years, and I have almost 30 years experience in the engineering, construction, procurement, and project management industry. Over the course of my travels covering more than 20 countries, I've had the opportunity to experience many projects and their handling of various risks. Over the past several years, I've actually noticed a shift in the types of risks that significantly impact projects, and I would like to share some of my thoughts on this matter today. As with many things in life, risk is simply a matter of perspective. To a local contractor, the day-to-day risks they face are simply a matter of their normal lives, and they have no choice but to accept them. However, for a client with a global footprint, or for that matter, their designated international contractor, who also may have reputational concerns, the same project may exceed their respective risk thresholds, and they may elect to avoid the risk entirely by simply canceling their plans. I believe the rules have fundamentally changed. Cost and schedule are no longer the greatest risks for many projects and programs. In fact, cost and schedule are simply becoming manifestations of higher order risks. We'll explore some of those today. It is also clear to me that high-risk projects exist everywhere. As you will see during this presentation, no one, no country, no industry has a monopoly on uncertainty. And finally, just as authority can be delegated, but responsibility cannot, risk will also ultimately impact the customer. That is to say, if all efforts to transfer or mitigate risk fail, the impact of the risk ultimately impacts the apex of the risk ownership, unless that organization is willing to completely forego the effort and thus avoiding the risk. Today, I would like to focus on capital works primarily in this session because that's where the majority of my experience lies. However, I do want to mention some non-capital types of projects as well and some of the risks that affect them. So starting with capital works, from a capital works perspective, as you can see, the old risks were bounded, often literally within a fence. They were governed by a legally binding commercial contract, and the customer and the contractor decided how to apportion, control, and mitigate those risks. In what I will refer to as new risks, however, they may not be well defined or contained for that matter. They may be governed by a social contract or an assumed responsibility, and there may be multiple self-selected parties who now determine how to apportion, control, and mitigate the risk. Going on to some of the non-capital works projects and programs, I wanted to point out these projects also carry the same type of risks that the capital projects do. It's just how they manifest themselves and to what degree. But they may include software development projects, product manufacturing, operations and maintenance, program management, and research and development projects. Now, if you're not sure if you're involved in a high-risk project or not, I would ask that you consider the following. If you count on winning the lottery for your funding, or where your reputational damage could be catastrophic, you might be on a high-risk project. If the lines between safety and security are blurred, for example, if your engineers are all wearing body armor and helmets instead of hard hats and pocket protectors, there's a good chance you're on a high-risk project. And finally, anytime you're implementing a first-of-a-kind technology, you are by definition on a high-risk project. Let's discuss economic factors for a moment. Many projects are started only to fall by the wayside due to poor economics. I'm sure all of us can think of abandoned skeletons of skyscrapers, highway upgrades that seem to last forever, or once vibrant shopping malls that have fallen on hard times. Dubai may well have been one of the most visible cases where the global economic crash caused a huge contraction in activity. Many countries continue to privatize national assets in order to restore their net debt position, while others are seeking to form joint ventures with private commercial entities. In either case, these efforts can bring on oversight with respect to the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development Anti-Bribery Convention, the UK Bribery Act, and a multitude of other national and international regulations. Related to the global debt restructuring following the Great Recession are calls for greater protectionist policies within affected countries. These countries, where high sustained levels of unemployment, are creating conditions for rollbacks of free trade agreements and cross-border labor arrangements. This high unemployment has a knock-on effect of drying up demand, thus further reducing gross domestic product and continuing to maintain the cycle of economic stagnation. However, on a positive note, societal pressure to mitigate some of the problems associated with capital projects has had a positive effect, specifically through the banking sector in the form of the Equator Principles. You can find out more about these at www.equator-principles.com. 4 banks initially developed the principles. They included ABN AMRO, Citigroup, Barclays, and West LB. And these principles are now endorsed by 62 banks around the world. These principles require environmental impact assessments, or EIAs, to be conducted, environmental standards compliance, as well as implementation of the appropriate social policies as part of the conditions for securing a loan. These principles have gone a long way toward ensuring local communities reap the full benefits of capital projects. In looking at the impact of the Great Recession, we can see how widespread the damage was by the year 2009. While some countries escaped relatively unscathed, others continue to struggle today. There have been some very sharp lines drawn between the austerity and stimulus camps, but in reality, there is no single solution that fits all countries. From a project management perspective, it is often under these dire economic times that major infrastructure programs are enacted by governments in order to put people to work and try to drive the economy through consumer spending. Let's move on to reputational loss now. I believe this is a risk category that is growing as a threat in our global economy. So, have you ever heard of any of these statements? No good deed goes unpunished, or the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and the law of unintended consequences. Some examples where reputational loss may occur include disaster relief programs that fail to meet expectations, infrastructure projects that displace large populations and can cause environmental disasters as well. Let's take a look at these a little more closely on the following slides. First, let's start with the earthquake relief program in Haiti. A bit of background on this. A 7.0 magnitude earthquake struck Haiti on January the 12th, 2010, causing widespread and very devastating damage. Although an international crisis response was formed quickly, it was hindered throughout the program by significant logistics failures, including the inability to effectively use the ports, airports, roads, and utilities, including telephone service, far beyond what was originally assessed in the damage assessments. Continuing to hamper the effort was the lack of baseline data. Without good census data, and even things such as land titles, it was difficult for donor nations and the coordinating relief project to estimate the scale of the damage and to start reconstruction efforts. For example, without clear title information, reconstruction couldn't begin because no one knew exactly what parcels of property belonged to which individuals. And finally, delays in providing funding by many of the countries. On the first anniversary of the earthquake, Haitian-born Michel Jean, who became United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization Special Envoy for Haiti on November the 8th, 2010, voiced her anger at the slow rate of aid delivery, placing much of the blame on the international community for abandoning its commitments. In a public letter co-authored with UNESCO head Irina Bokova, Jean said, "As time passes, what began as a natural disaster is becoming a disgraceful reflection on the international community." The Interim Haiti Recovery Commission, led by former U.S. President Bill Clinton and Haitian Prime Minister Jean-Max Bellerive, was set up to facilitate the flow of funds into reconstruction projects on April 10, 2010. But as of January 2011, no major reconstruction projects had started. Results of this: as of August the 12th, 2012, 375,000 displaced people remain in tent camps. The credibility of the United States and nations was severely undermined, and significant doubts exist within the donor community, both at the individual level and at the country level, about the efficacy of large-scale relief versus smaller, focused efforts. Now, moving on to another example, let's look at the Three Gorges Dam project in the People's Republic of China. Some background on this project: this was a major hydroelectric project on the Yangtze River. This was completed in 2006. Some issues that quickly became apparent, and in some cases continue today, include population displacement of over 1.4 million people, with additional displacements continuing each year due to landslides surrounding the reservoir. Environmental damage due to habitat impact, silting, and earth tremors caused by the immense pressure of the water. There is now an estimated 265 billion gallons of raw sewage being dumped into the Yangtze annually. This sewage now collects in the reservoir instead of being flushed downstream out into the ocean. The project has drawn significant international attention by both environmentalists and by human rights organizations. Now, I suppose if you look hard enough, you can always find a silver lining in every cloud. In this particular case, studying these large-scale population relocation projects is actually helping us to plan for future shifts in populations due to major climatic change and mitigation projects. Last, we'd like to look at another reputational loss case. Here, let's look at the BP drilling operations in the Gulf of Mexico. Some background on this project. This was the Deepwater Horizon drilling platform located off the U.S. coast. An explosion occurred on the 20th of April, 2010, releasing a significant amount of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. The wellhead was eventually sealed on the 15th of July, 2010. However, there have been residual leaks reported since that time. Impacts of this disaster include an estimated 4.9 million barrels of oil spilled, and that's a plus or minus 10% estimate by most experts. Because of that, there were major environmental, economic, and health issues. There's massive impact on marine flora and fauna, an equally massive impact on local fishing and tourism industries, and of course the massive impact to BP's bottom line in the form of lost revenue, stock devaluation, fines, and of course the cleanup costs. Lawsuits, many involving the health of the cleanup employees, will continue for years. Also of interest, the incorrect use of the term British Petroleum by the media and U.S. officials also caused an uproar in the UK. The name British Petroleum has not been used since they merged with American company Amoco, and they formally changed their name in 1998 to BP from British Petroleum. Irrespective of fault, BP ultimately bore the brunt of the reputation and resulting financial damage. The U.S. government was also soundly criticized for their lack of response. Let's move on to safety and security. This is an area that I find quite fascinating. I see now, based on projects that I visit, the traditional measures of health, safety, and environmental impacts don't always tell the full story. It's interesting because some of the traditional tools and practices in terms of standards or leading indicators, metrics that we measure, simply don't apply when you're in a high-risk project. The term personal protection equipment takes on an entirely different meaning in a war zone or a high-risk environment. But health, safety, and environmental does have a relationship to security. Oddly, it's possible and even common to have positive HSE statistics when you're working in a war zone or high security threat environment. I believe the heightened situational awareness helps keep the workforce focused and results in avoiding safety incidents. Other contributing factors may include austere working conditions, long hours, where there's not much time to enjoy yourself after work, and restriction to secure compounds and job sites help to minimize the opportunities for some of the more traditional health and safety issues. However, there really isn't an OSHA standard for kidnappings or rocket attacks. Taking a look at some of the logistics challenges faced in Afghanistan, there's always plenty of challenges in these war zone type project environments. Some are not specific to the location, but they're simply amplified by the situation. For example, a massive sandstorm would be disruptive for any project in the world, but when it shuts down all of your logistics in and out of a remote base, then it takes on an entirely different level of challenge. Simple tasks such as fuel provision for your equipment can be set back for weeks when a fuel depot is struck. There will be a short video posted to the World Risk Day website for separate viewing if you're interested in seeing the effect that an extreme nature of this risk can have. If you'll note at the end of the video the shock wave as it actually hits the camera. I mentioned austere working conditions earlier. I believe austere is really just a gentle way of describing tent accommodations, commonly ranging from 6 to 50 staff, or perhaps if you're lucky, a shipping container housing 1 to 5 staff. This may be both your office and your living quarters. Throughout the night, you can add in periodic wake-up calls delivered to you through sirens going off to alert you of incoming rockets or mortars. And then you can just toss in some heat, some dust, and a lot of mosquitoes and you have a pretty much a good description of austere. This type of project provides challenges with respect to life support and varies widely from project to project with respect to water availability, electricity, medical care, and even dining opportunities. As you'll note, on the slides, the attention poster about the combat showers. You learn to get in and out rather quickly under these conditions. Moving on, continuing with safety and security. Kidnapping of both expatriate staff and national staff has increased dramatically over the past several years. In some cases, there are ideological reasons, while in other cases, it's simply a cottage industry for quick cash. As you can see on the map, the number of piracy incidents that are occurring just in the Gulf of Guinea in 2013 from January 1st through today. These acts of piracy are on the rise throughout the world, but on the west coast of Africa near the Horn off of Somalia, that used to dominate the world's attention for several years, but it's also rising quickly in other locations. We'll move on to first-of-a-kind technologies now. This is a rather interesting area, and one in which, unfortunately, the old adage, if at first you don't succeed, try again, becomes very expensive very quickly. It's rather ironic, but it's advanced countries that are highly subject to this particular risk because they tend to be on the leading edge of innovation and they have the underlying economics to be able to support this type of efforts. Based on some research I conducted, this was a fascinating example of how first-of-a-kind technology both caused an issue but also resolved one. So a little bit about this example, the Hubble Space Telescope. This program was led by the United States NASA, which is the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, with assistance by the European Space Agency. The telescope was launched in 1990 at a program cost of US $2.5 billion. But the program quickly ran into some issues. The scientists and astronomers quickly discovered that the telescope was unable to focus on the distant stars that they were trying to research. And based on investigations, they determined during the initial grinding and polishing of the mirror, there was an error made. To start with, in the early setup, 2 conventional optical devices were used in the grinding and polishing process. However, for the final manufacturing step, a custom-built device, first of its kind, designed specifically to meet very strict tolerances, was used. Ironically, this first-of-a-kind device was assembled incorrectly, resulting in an extremely precise but wrongly shaped for the mirror. To resolve the problem, a set of corrective lenses had to be transported into space and installed. Again, another first-of-a-kind solution. A total of 5 maintenance missions have been completed to the telescope, with total program cost now standing at US $10 billion and rising. In summary, as noted in today's discussion, the world of project management faces new and ever-evolving risks. Just as the risks we face have evolved, risk management processes, tools, and approaches have to evolve as well. I would like to thank you for your time today, and I welcome any feedback you may have on today's presentation. This concludes our session.